Welcome to Day 4 of the Pearson Center's Change Conference. My name is Kathy Cotras. I'm an advisory board member of the Pearson Center and a senior broker with Mortgage Architects. As you may know, the Pearson Center is a leading progressive think tank that addresses the challenging issues of the day. This conference builds on last year's work when we addressed COVID and beyond through 40 webinars attended by 8,000 people. Over these 3 weeks, our conference will consist of 12 webinars with many leaders from business, labor, the NGO sector, and from both houses of Parliament. We are proud to say that we are the only think tank conference which includes representatives from all 5 federal parties, top business and labor leaders, and many other experts. As we like to say, we bring people and ideas together to come up with good public policy initiatives. The focus of the conference is simple. With everything changing so rapidly, how do we plan for the long term and realize the full potential of our workforce and the possibilities inherent in our comparative advantages while respecting our Canadian values and principles? I want to take a moment to recognize that the Pearson Centre is headquartered on the traditional lands of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples. Our speakers and audience come from traditional Indigenous lands across Turtle Island. I also want to thank our sponsors, Bruce Power, CN, and the Hill Times, and a special thank you to our long-standing sponsors, Canada's Building Trades Unions and the International Association of Firefighters. While the webinars are free, we welcome audience members to visit our website, thepearsoncentre.ca, if you care to make a donation. Be much appreciated. This is our 6th session, and what a stimulating series it has been so far. Today our webinar is a fireside chat, first with the Honourable Perrin Beatty, former parliamentarian and president of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. It is immediately followed by a conversation with Jerry Dias, the national president of Unifor. They will be in conversation with JP Gladu. He's a conference co-chair, the president of A2A Rail Canada, and he's the past CEO of the Canadian Aboriginal Business Council. JP, thank you for your meaningful participation and leadership in this conference. The format for this session consists of a half-hour conversation with each guest. It's run by our great moderator. We will end at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. With that, over to you, JP.
Thank you, Kathy. Perrin, it's great to see you. I miss our times where we can actually get together in person. I think one of my favorite times was when we were on the East Coast together. We were heading into one of those talks that you are so good at doing all the time, and sitting down with you and enjoying some personal time. So this is going to have to do for now, but looking forward to.
It's a poor substitute to sharing a lobster with you, but I'm delighted to be able to get together, JP.
Well, listen, we've got a budget coming out on Monday, and we've largely been, of course, very reactive to the pandemic and trying to get ahead of it whenever we can. I mean, the budget's been very much supportive of our way of life, making sure people are healthy, make sure people can get food on their table. But you know, we're starting to see a light at the end of the tunnel. And but we've had some, as you know, you run the Business Council of Canada, and you know, I still keep in touch with my good friend Tabitha Bull, who runs the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business, and our businesses have been hurting, and there's that need to open up safely. When the budget comes out, what are you hoping for our country?
The most important thing at this point, JP, is a plan. Business needs to know what the government's strategy is. For the last year, we've been largely reactive. We've seen what the pandemic has done as it came ashore in Canada, as we saw various waves coming and going, and we've been reactive, and we've tended to react with shutdowns and subsidies. As you mentioned, we're in the middle of this 3rd wave, which is exceptionally difficult and in many ways more dangerous than what we've seen so far. But with the arrival of vaccines, we can actually see the prospects of getting out of the tunnel this year. This means that the budget on Monday should be setting out what the government's strategy is. how do we move from an economy that's largely based on subsidies to one where both families and businesses are able to become self-sufficient again? What's the strategy to get there from here?
Yeah, what are some of those strategies that some of the businesses are looking for? I mean, it must be incredibly difficult, especially the ones that have just been hanging on, to get a start and then to be told to shut down again, to get a start and being told to shut down again. From their perspectives, what do you think some of the businesses would be hoping for as far as those strategies going forward? I mean, continuity would be a good one, as an example.
Yeah, very, very much so. And if you look particularly at SMEs, the Canadian Federation of Independent Business has estimated that the average SME has accumulated around $170,000 of COVID-related debt. They're stretched to the point where they can't assume any more debt. And where it's going to be important then for the supports that we've had in place to be continued through the summer until we're into reopening and until businesses are able to stand on their own feet again. So part of it is the question of continued supports and timing and how we phase down those supports effectively as we reopen the economy. Most importantly, we need to have a strategy. We need to know what the government's plans are. I'll give you an example of the border, where the Canada-US border is closed today. None of us knows when it'll be safe to reopen it. But there's no reason why we shouldn't know the criteria that will be used for reopening the border so people can begin to do planning. And the most important thing in the budget and in all of the government's communications at this point is, what is our strategy for keeping people safe and for minimizing the amount of restrictions they have to have on them between now and the time that we can fully reopen? And how do we transition then from an economy that's essentially being carried by the government to one where the growth takes place in the private sector, and where we move people away from subsidies to being able to pay taxes and support public spending again.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a very rich, diverse country. I can imagine some of the sectors are obviously more impacted than others. One of the challenges that I've been seeing, and as an example, just trying to understand what the criteria is, trying to build a railway. I can't get up to the Yukon or the territories because of having to sit in a hotel room for a couple of weeks, and there's still a lot of uncertainty. And communities, even if I did manage to get up there, I'm not going to be able to get out to meet communities because they're not comfortable yet sitting down with outsiders. And one of the things that I've seen up in the far north is just a decimation of the tourism sector. I mean, that's absolutely one part of our economy that's just been just severely damaged. Are there others, or do you want to reflect on that? And then maybe on the flip side of that, so for some of us that are very lucky to have employment or doing work, some of us are busier than ever. So which ones are thriving? Which ones are struggling? What are you seeing from your members?
Well, some businesses are doing very well. Those that are digital. Shopify here in Ottawa is a very good example of that. Companies that are providing telemedicine, companies like TELUS, for example. What we've seen is in the digital field that Canada has advanced with digitalization several years over the course of a few months, and that companies that are involved in that area have done very well and are positioned very well for the future. Other companies, though, look at anybody in travel and tourism. Usually in a recession, it's first in, first out. The sector that gets hit first is the one that comes out most rapidly. In the case of tourism and travel, they were first in and they'll likely be last out. So people running restaurants, hotels, the airlines, anybody offering ancillary services around that, the festivals, tour operators and others have all been severely hit, and it will be slow coming back out. So it is uneven in terms of the impact of the recession, uneven in terms of sectors, uneven in terms of groups. Women have been, people talk about a she-cession. Women have been particularly hard hit. New Canadians have been hit. If you look, for example, the restaurant sector, who are the people who are employed there? They tend to be people who are new Canadians, women, young people, and so on. And they've been hit harder than many of the rest of us. And JP, what you were talking about internal travel in Canada is another example of what I was mentioning earlier. If you've been vaccinated, what does that mean? How do we change the regulations based on whether or not somebody is unlikely to get the disease or to transmit the disease? Does this allow us then to begin to reopen both domestic and international travel? Can we start to see one another again? The Centers for Disease Control in the US have talked about the ability to people to gather in larger groups after they've been vaccinated. We've heard about businesses wanting to reopen if people have been vaccinated. The same with internal travel within Canada. If you don't pose a threat to people's health, then should there be greater freedom for you to be able to move within Canada or move across international boundaries? We need to think that through, and people need to know where they stand.
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredibly difficult conversation. There's a wide view I mean, there's still a hesitancy, particularly when you look at the groups like Black people or Indigenous people who have a reluctance to engage or to be vaccinated, which creates more anxiety, I would guess. And we just want to know what the criteria is. I mean, even across the province, depending on what province or territory you're going to, the standards differ. Now we're starting to see some statements from, as an example, Premier Ford on, trying to don't fly back into our province, and it's creating a lot of anxiety. One of the other anxiety items is this whole idea of passports, to prove that you've been vaccinated. We were talking about, showing up at a concert. Like, who has the right to ask? I mean, is it appropriate? This is a really challenging situation, and Canada, we need to, I think you and I both agree on this, we need to get ahead of these types of criteria and start laying down the map instead of being told. What are you thinking? What are you saying?
And that's the fundamental question here. That's simple. The terminology vaccine passports is probably a misnomer. What we're really talking about is digital vaccination certificates. Many of us have those yellow cards, those of us who travel internationally, because other countries require that we have proof of vaccination. If you send your kids to school in Ontario, I think there are 9 different vaccines or 9 different diseases against which the kids have to be vaccinated, and you have to have proof that that's taken place. This would be a secure digital form of a vaccination certificate. These will be required by many countries in terms of international travel. So whatever Canada does, Canadian citizens will be getting them if they want to enter into some countries. In addition to that, even in the non-governmental sector, we are seeing businesses and others saying these certificates can be helpful in terms of us opening up our businesses more rapidly and granting more freedom to people to be able to move around. There were the concert promoters in Ottawa who were looking at a concert where people, if they could prove that they had been vaccinated or if they'd been tested negative for COVID, that they could put on a concert and allow people to go. The purpose of this is to allow people to safely get their lives back as rapidly as possible. The alternative to it is you say, we will wait until we hit herd immunity at some point. When that's going to be, we're not sure, maybe later this year, but that everybody will be restricted until then, and we won't allow anybody to get their life back. Now, the advantage with this sort of a system is allowing people to get their life back earlier and allowing the economy to reopen more rapidly. But the one thing that's clear is they are coming. Canadians will be participating in them. The issue is, will we be setting standards? Will our governments be in front of it and saying, this is how we see them being used and how they shouldn't be?
Right. Yeah. It's going to be interesting, and especially with folks that are very much anti-vaccinations, and to see how we're going to have to work with or deal with that. I mean, mandating. I mean, this is a big
JP,
question.
you take a member of your family if they're in a long-term care facility. Mm-hmm. There are restrictions, obviously, in terms of getting into those facilities to visit. As we begin to reopen them, Will you be more comfortable if you know that somebody wandering around the facility seeing somebody who maybe have an immune problem within your family or who's very elderly, that people who are seeing them have been vaccinated and are unlikely and have been tested and are unlikely to pass the disease along. This is a protection for the public, and it's something that can be very beneficial, and it can allow us both to get our lives back more quickly and to reopen our economy more quickly.
Yeah, we've got to get our economy going. As an entrepreneur myself, it's devastating to read all these stories of these entrepreneurs not, closing up shop. My sister's an interior designer decorator in Kelowna, and she's near the brink. She's just starting to come back, but it's going to be a long, arduous struggle to get back to where she was. What are you seeing from federal and maybe provincial supports for businesses and workers? What do you see that's coming out there or signaling, or what would you like to see that maybe hasn't been thought about?
Let me first thank governments for the efforts they've made up until now in providing supports for business. Without it, particularly SMEs would have simply been gone in so many areas. And many of them are on life support today. It's going to be critical for government, first of all, to continue the wage subsidy and the rent subsidies for small businesses for the foreseeable future until they can get properly reopened and get back on their feet. It will be useful. One of the things I'll be watching for in the budget is we may very well see that the government is looking at providing assistance to small businesses to digitalize. It's very interesting when you look at the statistics. Larger businesses are highly digital at this point. Smaller businesses have not been able to do so. This is going to be critical for the future, and smaller businesses are going to need assistance to be able to do that. That's one of the areas that I would watch for. If we want to ensure the ability to reopen, we have to allow women to get back to work. Women are both, if you look at the number of small businesses across the country, women entrepreneurs are critical in those. And also, in terms of just getting our workforces back and enabling women who, for the most part, still in our society, carry most of the burden of child rearing, we have to have the affordable childcare for them to be able to do that. And we have to keep the schools open. And that's going to be very important. So I'll be looking, the federal government isn't responsible for schools, but I'll be certainly looking to see, are there measures they're putting in place in the short term that will help to ensure that there's affordable childcare there that will help women to get back into the workforce.
Yeah, this has been an incredible learning experience for all of us. There's always going to be innovation that comes out of major impacts like a global pandemic. Of course, working from home, the ability to reduce your costs and allow more life balance. I mean, you and I are these road warriors for years. How cool would, I've been enjoying, I'm in Vancouver today, but for the most part, I've been up in my community, being able to do work from there. How do you see that shift? I mean, the government was talking about, or was there recommendations about retrofits to buildings, et cetera, downtown. It's like, I'm going to be in Calgary next week, and I'm going, man, oh man, that city's already been challenged enough. And how's that going to impact, the major municipalities and the businesses? Because it's a chain effect. How are you seeing?
I've talked to more CEOs in the last 12 months than I have in the previous 5 years. I've yet to have any of them say to me that their business is going to look the same after we get out of this as it did going in. And that means both in terms of how do we deal with our customers, how do we do production, what are we doing about global supply chains, what is the nature of work going to look like? One of the areas that the Pearson Center may be interested in doing some work on is the nature of work itself. I think we're going to be finding not that there will be no more offices in Canada, but rather that the hybrid model is something we're going to be seeing much more of. The good news here is that you'll be able to be in Timmins, Ontario, or in Whitehorse and working at a job in Toronto because of these technologies. That's a great thing. But it also means that you're going to be competing against somebody from Tel Aviv or from Hong Kong. for that job as well. The nature of work is changing. I don't think any of us fully understands how much it's changing. We're going to be seeing categories of work that are going to be particularly hard hit as a result of digitalization and just the changes in business organization that results from the pandemic. Where you're dealing with people who are in their 50s and have been working in a particular job all of their lives, and that job is disappearing. How do we help them make the transition and ensure that their skills can be used in the workforce, or that there's support for them if they can't be? We've got to get our heads around those issues and get in front of them, as opposed to waiting until after we're reopened.
You know, that you bring up an interesting point, because we're a very big country from east to west, where our population is usually down around the border. But I was really pleased to see, you know, the Canadian Infrastructure Bank stepping up, and I'm just kind of maybe switching to our northern communities. You know, I'm First Nation. I live in a northern community, and bandwidth and infrastructure for me to be able to compete is just on the edge. And a lot of communities don't have access, you know, to these things and all the things that help Canadian entrepreneurs be competitive. So this is a real opportunity for us, I think. And what would you like to see? I mean, they've got the $1 billion fund for Indigenous partnerships, but infrastructure is a really great tool to rebuild our economy, and really, but we got to think strategically about where we put our resources. President Biden just came out with his plan on bridges and rails, and you know, what would you hope to see from if you had the pen to that?
The government, you'll notice when you watch any announcements come out of government these days, they have expunged the word spending. Every dollar that goes out of government is an investment. The government of Canada, the government of Ontario, Yukon government is investing in whatever. I think we have to look at the strict definition of the word. What is the return that you get? When you have an investment, you're looking for a return.
Right.
We have a serious infrastructure deficit in Canada, and it means that we have to do triage. We can't simply spread the money across the country like peanut butter on toast. We have to target it, genuinely use it as investment, say where is there the economic return that allows us to improve people's standards of living and create opportunities for people. And that certainly includes in Indigenous communities, and it includes in rural and remote areas. One of the, you know, we've paid a horrible price through this pandemic, but some of the gains that we've had here have included digitalization and what it's meant. What this means for the community that you come from is that no matter how rural and remote it is, that the residents will have access to the best educational and medical minds in the country, if not the world, while living in a remote community. This is an incredible step forward, but you need the infrastructure to be able to do it. Mm-hmm. So we definitely have to be rolling out the high-speed infrastructure across the country, particularly to rural and remote areas. It means that craftspeople in Nunavut are more able to sell their goods all over the world to a global market, if we have the infrastructure there to be able to do it. We need, as we look at how we roll out this infrastructure, to make sure that we have private sector growth and that we have inclusive growth, that everybody benefits, nobody falls behind as a result, and we need to use the money well. We can't borrow our way to prosperity. We can't cut our way to prosperity. We have to grow our way to prosperity. And where we have discretion to be able to make public expenditures, we need to use it the discretion very judiciously, to make sure that we're actually encouraging the improvements to people's living standards as much as possible.
Yeah, on that note, there's still a ton of inequality in our country, and the overcoming those inequalities with the marginalized groups, which I'm part of one of the most marginalized groups. What kind of policies or perhaps investments, as you say, would we expect from our government, given where we are today?
Well, our starting point is that nobody should be left to fall behind for no fault of their own. We talked earlier about the unevenness of how the pandemic has hit people. Even if you look at postal codes within cities, for example, what you'll find is the poorest neighborhoods where the incidence of COVID is the highest. These also happen to be the most racialized neighborhoods for the most part too. There are a variety of reasons where you have 3 generations of a family living under one roof. What you get is a spread of the disease that you don't have in an area where you have lower density in the housing, where people have to work in warehouses, for example, as opposed to being able to work from home in comfort, working from a computer. They're more exposed to the disease. We need to recognize that so many of the issues that we have don't hit Canadians evenly, and that we need to use our resources in a way to make sure that everybody is treated fairly, that we remove obstacles to people's ability to get ahead, and that we provide the social safety net that we have to for the people who are most in need. So we need to be judicious. One of the arguments that I've made from the outset is that government supports with COVID should not be one size fits all. They should be tailored to the specific need of the sector or of the group that we're talking about, and that's going to be particularly important as we move to recovery, and as we look at the genuine investments that are going to have to be made. Let's look at those communities that don't have water. If we're talking about putting infrastructure in, giving people clean drinking water, in my view, classifies as an investment, and it should be right near the top of the list. Rolling out broadband, making sure that people have adequate health care, all of these are critical investments.
Absolutely. I mean, water is a human right. I would hope it should be at the very top.
It's stunning that in 2021 that we have Canadians who don't have access to clean drinking water. It is a national shame.
Yeah, we can and we have to do better. Perrin, it's a real pleasure. We've got a couple minutes left. Your good friend Jerry's coming up next, and maybe
say hello to me for me.
I absolutely will, but it's our workers that make this country, and it's it's imperative that we protect them and support them. Any last thoughts on how we're going to be able to ensure that there are a lot of people that are going to be coming out of severe debt in some terrible circumstances as a result of this pandemic? Some words of advice to the people that employ them or are looking to employ them, and maybe to the workers themselves.
I think the first thing is a general message to everybody that we are in dark times right now, and they may get darker. I was looking at the figures for Ontario and for Ottawa, where we had today the highest figures ever reported for COVID. Things may get darker before they get better, but the end of the tunnel is in sight. The arrival of vaccines will make a difference. Life won't be exactly like it was before COVID, in the same way as it isn't as it was before 9/11, but it will be substantially the same. And there is hope here. The critical thing is for all of us to work together, business, individuals, governments, to keep people safe between now and the time that we can reopen, and to hasten the day when we can move to ensuring that all families and all businesses are able to be self-sustaining again, and that we as Canadians can get our lives back.
Yeah, wise words, and that hope. It's really important, and we are coming out of this, and it's just a little stay strong, Canada. Well, Perrin, thank you again so much. I know we really do appreciate your time, and it's really good to see your one-dimensional face. So look forward to that next time we can get together for dinner in person.
I owe you the dinner. I'll look forward to it. All the best, Jake. And thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely.
Bye.
Bye-bye. So I believe we are transitioning over to Jerry now, so we'll just hold on for a bit. All right. Hey, there he is. We got you.
You got me? Can you hear me?
Yeah. You're looking very bright today, Jerry. I like the color.
I thought, what the hell? I figured that Perrin would probably have on a white shirt with a collar, so I thought I'd throw a curve into you.
Well, I won't tell Perrin this because I know he signed off, but you're definitely, and I'm just going to say this from a physical point of view, very much brighter than your friend Perrin today.
You know what? I listened to the tail end of what he was saying, and look, I'm spending a fair bit of time with Perrin. He's starting to sound like a socialist.
I hope he's listening in so that he was hoping for a rebuttal.
He's a decent man. We've had our debates over the years, but I've always found Perrin to be respectful, thoughtful in his presentations, and I think he's a man of conviction. So I got a lot of time for Perrin.
No, as do I. And
we agree to disagree, that's okay. That's what makes the world go around anyway. If we all agree with each other, it'd be pretty damn boring, you know?
You know, absolutely. I mean, if we all agree, this would be a really incredibly boring place, and you know, it's we wouldn't be Canada because we are incredibly diverse. And to me, actually, one of the questions I had asked Perrin, and maybe I'll put a slight twist on it, given you know how important your role in this country is with Unifor, and I was the workers in the world, and we've got an incredibly diverse country. You know myself as a First Nation guy, we've got the Black movement. We've got just so much happening in this country. Just a very high level question to you, Jerry. How are you seeing the representation out in the workforce? How are you seeing just as an Indigenous person, it's great to see our workers, but there's also the progression of the minority group coming up through the ranks. How is that all looking in through your lens these days?
Well, it's an interesting conversation because I will argue that we are living in the largest civil rights discussion we've ever had in our history.
Mm-hmm.
So much is flowing from the United States, so much is flowing from Trump. I will argue that the Trump presidency, he almost empowered racism and sexism and homophobia. And so we're having the debate as we should. So internally, we've been pushing governments for equity audits to have real conversations on Canadians, percentage of Canadians in the different racialized communities or equity groups, jobs, opportunities, where are people slotted in the economic system. So it is a raging debate about opportunities. I take a look at how many racialized workers are in the top corporate seats of corporate Canada. I take a look at our workplaces. I take a look at the forestry sector in Indigenous communities. And you take a look and you find out that maybe 5% of the workforce are Indigenous workers. Does that make a stitch of sense to anybody? The answer is no. So the debate is happening. We were just in bargaining with the Detroit Three, where we talked and we negotiated equity reps in our workplaces. General Motors is going to be hiring thousands of people. We've already had discussions with General Motors to make sure that our workplace reflects our communities. So the debate is ongoing and it's happening. And I think I will argue in many circumstances that corporate America is almost embarrassed if they take a look at the history of their hiring practices. So I think there's a lot of changes going on today.
I agree. And the group the organization that you represent is so incredibly important to go to bat for the workers that are diverse. What are your how do you go about doing it to get more of the folks into the various levels, whether that's forestry, mining, construction? What are the tools that you implement that people should be listening to and that we can actually bring to the government? Because sometimes people put their blinders on. They've tried stuff in the past, so we've tried that didn't work, but that's no way to go about our future.
The age-old argument, and it frustrates the hell out of me, where people will say, well, we're hiring the best candidate.
What is that?
Exactly.
What is that?
It's total nonsense because it's one individual's perception of who the best candidate is. And we've lived lifetimes and generations, and our history is one of discrimination. Our history as a nation, our history globally, has been about unfair opportunities based on the color of your skin. So if in fact you are going to use the who is the most qualified, is that going to be based on entire groups of workers being absolutely discriminated against and not given the same opportunities? So this argument is a heck of an argument. All you have to do is take a look at the numbers. And I listened to what Perrin was saying, and Perrin was dead on. Because who are the workers who are the most vulnerable to contracting COVID? Racialized communities. On Ottawa and Toronto, the latest number says that COVID is hitting racialized communities 1.5 times faster than non-racialized communities.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about, and what's the reasons? And Perrin was right. Housing, lack of affordable housing. Racialized workers are in low-income jobs, the lowest paid jobs. Take public transit, at the front lines, service sector jobs, accommodations. So if you take a look at the wage structure, racialized workers are overrepresented in low-income jobs. And being in low-income jobs leads to all of the other problems that we're talking about related to COVID.
Yeah.
If I take a look at where are we facing the areas now that is in your face, crystal clear examples of inequality, because COVID has exposed it. Because who are the essential workers? Who are they? Grocery store workers, healthcare workers, transit drivers, airline workers. I can start to walk through the list. A list of essential jobs that are predominantly women, healthcare predominantly women of color.
Yeah.
So we are now having the debate about standard of living, wages, equality. It's about time.
You bring up something of a debate going on, and I'll put it through maybe the procurement lens. There's conscious and unconscious biases. I mean, you look at somebody's name on a resume, and if it says Bilal or Malik or some non-white name, they're at the bottom of the pile. There was, so the whole thing is around targets. And I was listening to Wes Hall when he was talking about the Governor General Awards, and that was, I can't remember, it was probably a few months ago. And he was talking about the system is all broken because the system perpetuates these biases that leaves people like you having to deal with that kind of fallout where the racialized people are the lowest paid in all the infrastructure. What can we be doing to support and overcome that inequality? Targets, mandates, I don't know, like we've got to get outside of this. We got to fix the system. It's obviously broken.
No, the system is broken. And the first thing that it required to fix a broken system is conversation about the fact that we have a broken system. When I listen to police chiefs say that systemic racism doesn't exist within the police force, then you got to shake your head because you know it does. Mm-hmm. And we can argue that systemic racism is everywhere. Mm-hmm. And if in fact we are going to deny, which I will unequivocally say is blatantly obvious, if in fact we won't even recognize that we live in a racist society, it creates additional barriers on how you're going to fix it. Because if you honestly believe, geez, there's nothing wrong, then you're not going to do anything to change a system that is wrong. The numbers show it. Why is it that racialized workers occupied the lowest paid jobs. Why? It's a variety of reasons. Lack of opportunities. For the starter, why are there lack of opportunities? I've already talked about it. So it's going to take a complete revamping of how people think. Because I will argue that before we can move forward, there has to be a straight recognition that we live in a racist society. And so if you can come to that realization, then what are you going to do to fix it? What are we going to do at the bargaining table as a union? When we kicked off the Detroit 3 negotiations in the fall of last year, the bargaining committee all wore Black Lives Matters t-shirts. Let me tell you, the emails were over the top, and we knew it, by the way. We knew it. We knew that we were going to, we're stirring up a hornet's nest because racism exists in all of our workplaces. We had our own members emailing us saying, hey, what are we doing? You're supposed to be talking about our wages and our benefits and our working conditions, not recognizing that the workforce is a part of the equation. And that equality, look, you can't have a strong labor movement if there's divisions based on race and sex. You can't build a labor movement if you're dealing with rampant inequality. So you got to figure it out. You can't have it both ways. And so we wore the Black Lives Matters t-shirt because we wanted to have the debate. We wanted to make sure, and we negotiated it, where we'll have a minute of silence on Emancipation Day. Because it's about the discussion in the workplace. Like, what do you mean the line is shutting down for a minute? Why? Well, it's to talk about our history. And so it's only if we continue to have these discussions, and it's only if we continue to challenge each other, unions challenging employers in the workplace, challenging our own members, challenging societal issues that may not be all that comfortable. But we have to. I'm very comfortable having this conversation.
And that's really important.
Because I honestly believe we live in a flawed society.
I think it takes more leaders to be stepping up to the plate like yourself to call it out. I think, there's just too many times where we're in rooms when we hear the conversations going on, and how many times I've shaken my head. And I think the most important thing is that if it's an Indigenous issue or a Black issue or any kind of minority issue, that the non-minority Black or Indigenous people step up and go, we need to change this. So let's assume that we are breaking through some of the psyche in North Canada and maybe eventually, hopefully someday, the States around racism. What are some of the things that we should be thinking? Because there are some really great progressive companies out there that are doing good work, working with unions like yourself doing the work. What are you seeing? What are you seeing the breakthroughs to make sure that we're making a difference in the lives of Canadians, which contribute to our overall society and health?
Well, first of all, we have to work on the premise that our workplaces must reflect the communities in which we live in. That's number one. And the second you deal with that fundamental right, then I will argue things start to fall into place. But it takes willing partners, because the whole argument of I'm going to hire the most qualified person, right off the bat, you're putting in place barriers not to do the right thing. Right off the bat, you're saying, hold on here, I would like to do this, but, oh, forget it. Because the reality is we all have the same capabilities. All of us. Some of us may have had more experience, but in many circumstances, more experience doesn't mean that you're more qualified in the short term or the long term. So it's about fairness. And look, I raised this earlier on, and it's a template for what we're doing all over the place. Because there is no question, our General Motors workforce, starting in August of 2021, when GM embarks on a major hiring path, when we finish, and we are running a 1-shift operation, a 2-shift operation, a 3-shift operation in Oshawa. That plant in 2022, when we are in full production, will look very different than the plant that closed in December of 2019. But it's because of the conversations.
Right.
And it's about the corporate community going, okay, maybe we weren't concentrating enough, or we weren't, and like, let's talk about union plants. They're seniority based. When we hit mass layoffs, who gets laid off first? Women, workers of color. Because so many, the history, I will argue, and I'm generalizing now for the point, but so much of the history of the manufacturing sector, the oil and energy sector, the forestry sector, the main economic sectors in this country employed white men. So things are changing, because there's no question. My parents came from Guyana. My parents ended up in Canada instead of the United States because Canada was a part of the British Commonwealth, and it was called British Guyana back in those days. So we ended up in Canada for no other reason besides they wanted to get away from Guyana, and it was easier to come here. But my life today and my example is the same as millions and millions and millions of Canadians. So society has changed. This isn't the same country that it was 100 years ago. Not the same country that it was 70 years ago. There's a different mindset. The country looks different today. So now it's about getting with the program and making sure that our workplaces look like our communities. So there's a lot of work that has to be done.
No, absolutely, and I think there's a sort of a common theme happening, or at least that I'm hearing. It's unfortunate, but we've got to hit sort of these breaking points, and before we can actually recreate something, because we get too comfortable. And as we come out of this global pandemic this year, hopefully, the economy is going, I sure hope, is going to be front and center. The economy has been largely, or at least the businesses and the entrepreneurs and the workforce have been largely, I won't say the workforce because they've been supported through some of the federal funding, but what are your recommendations for this country? There's a budget coming out. We've got some infrastructure needs. Workers are going to be absolutely, I'm sure hoping that we're going to see a shortage in workers because everybody that can work is working. But what do we need? What are your recommendations?
Well, first of all, we need to learn from what the pandemic has exposed, is that we do not have a strong economic infrastructure in this country. And by that, I'm talking about social programs. The first thing that happened when the pandemic hit, and I give the federals a lot of credit because they listened to a lot of people, because the conversations we watched as COVID was in Europe, it was running rampant in several European countries. And we said, and we all knew that it was on its way. And so the government, we're talking to the government right off the bat about what became CERB, because you said, listen, the first group of workers that are going to hit, and we watched the cruise ships unloading and people being quarantined. And then eventually the hotels got shut down and the restaurants all got shut down. And so the conversations right off the bat was, we better get money in people's pockets immediately, or we're going to have a financial collapse. And so the government moved quickly and created CERB, which I thought was a smart move. Why? Because, look, we were all venturing into different territory here. Like, there was nothing that says when you have a pandemic, do this. Like, there's no book, Pandemic for Dummies, right, that says here's what you do. So that was critical. But what it also did, it shows the flaw in our EI system, because CERB was created because EI couldn't keep up. It crashed. So now what did we learn? We learned that the most essential frontline workers in this country, by and large, aren't even eligible for EI. They're the most important during a pandemic. And then when we hopefully get back to an element of normalcy, they wouldn't even qualify. Why? Because so many of the frontline essential workers are precarious part-time. So we need to fix that, because it takes too many hours and even to qualify for EI. I think only about 38% of people are even eligible for unemployment insurance. Doesn't make any sense. So now is an opportunity to fix it, because we need to make sure that we put into place a structure that ensures Canadians are taken care of. So we need to have these types of debates so we know the wage subsidy that the government put in was a great program, kept a lot of people at work. But we also know that it fell short. Why? Because employers were refusing to pay pension contributions, non-taxable benefits. And so a lot of the employers said, listen, I'll do everything I can to get people back to work, but the price of coffee is too much. So there's the whole issue, first of all, of a social infrastructure. Because we can't have people who have lost their jobs as a result of the pandemic that have no access to pharmacare. What did the pandemic show us? That we need a universal childcare program in this country, because it's a barrier towards equality for women. So now we know what happens. We've seen what happens. So we know what the social things are we can do, but then we need to put into place strong procurement policies where I will argue that the focus of the $100 billion a year that government spend on procurement is about putting Canadians to work. Bridges, roads, I can walk right through the different infrastructure. Hospitals, long-term care facilities. Should we now start talking about getting rid of for-profit long-term care homes as a part of a strategy towards safety? What did we learn during this pandemic from an industrial point of view? We're a nation that was caught with our pants down. No vaccines. The ability to build vaccines left years ago under the Harper regime and was never rebuilt during Trudeau's. So we're scrambling now. We couldn't even provide the most basic safety for Canadians as it related to personal protective equipment. And I'll never forget when Donald Trump told 3M not to ship the masks to Canada. So you have to learn from this. You have to say, never again as a nation can we get caught like this. And so where's the future heading? We just negotiated about $6 billion with the auto industry. The perception for decades, I will argue, was that the auto industry was a dying industry here in Canada, until we just bargained about $6 billion worth of investment, of which $5 billion is going towards electric vehicles. So it's about looking at the future and dealing with the challenges in the present. So if we are heading towards a green world and a green economy, then the government's better get with the program. And I know we're spending a lot of time talking about green strategies, and we're talking about how do we put people to work implementing those strategies. So there's a great debate going on right now as to what the economy is going to look like. And that's critical, because the only way we're going to get out of this, A, we have to be preoccupied with our health, but B, we need to be preoccupied with what the economy is going to look like when we get through this. And one thing that's for sure, we better be paying attention as to what's happened in the last year, because this showed us how not to do things, but showed us what we should be doing.
You know, I come largely from a natural resource background. I also sit on a junior mining company's board, and you're talking about the auto industry. What other country in the world has all of the resources that it needs to provide all the raw materials to manufacture those vehicles? But where do all our natural resources go, and we buy them back at a premium? I mean, you're hitting it on the head there. I mean, we have to better integrate. And that the jobs and just everything that comes along, we could be the powerhouse in the world when it comes to a green economy.
Boy, you're sounding like me
Uh-oh.
as it relates to that, because my argument has always been only a government or only a nation as rich in natural resources and raw materials as we are wouldn't use it as the foundation of their economy. So think about it. So as a nation, we are probably one of the best off in the world, surrounded with water.
Clean water, a lot of it.
Clean water. Think about the raw materials. Look, we're having a debate about electric vehicles, and we're talking about the batteries. What are the key ingredients in batteries? Magnesium, nickel, cobalt, aluminum. Geez, what do we have in abundance of in Canada? So now we're talking about how in the heck do we attract a battery company, because the battery is the heart of electric vehicles. But if we weren't having this conversation, we would sit there and go, put on our dunce cap like we have historically, and we would ship all of our raw materials around the world, and we'd buy back the finished products because we've been comfortable doing that.
Yeah.
Very comfortable doing that because that's our history. It's just inferiority complex that we'll let somebody else do it. Or this preoccupation about whatever we do, we have to make sure that we buy it at the cheapest possible price. That's always been the mindset, which is ridiculous. Like Canada is like a Walmart as a nation. Let's just bring in the cheapest supplies as we can, and we'll use that as the foundation of economic growth. So it's ridiculous. So here we are, oil, gas, you name it, we've got it. The whole debate with pipelines is interesting, but why out on Vancouver Island do we get our fuel from the state of Washington? Explain that one to me.
Well, I don't understand. We're the most regulated country that I'm aware of. We respect largely, I mean, coming a long way with Indigenous partnerships, Northern workers, and we're importing our oil. It doesn't make much sense to me either, but we have to have some real conversations about energy in the country. It's here to stay for a very long time. We need to be leading, and we also need to be leading in the transition. And it's not going to be a full trend. We're always going to rely on oil and gas, but we've got such a plethora of opportunity, and I think we're not nowhere near where we need to be. Well, listen, Jerry, I only have about a minute or so left. Last words to you. The unions, they stick up for workers' rights. We've seen numbers sort of declining over time. Do you think there's going to be a resurgence? I mean, that's a big question for a couple of minutes, but you know, it's an important one.
Look, unions are the rebound in this country. In the last year, it's gone in Canada from about a 30.2% unionization rate in Canada to 32%. It's huge. So the numbers are changing. The question is why? Like I said earlier on, the pandemic has shown the real inequality in this world. Like grocery store workers who are by and large making minimum wage or just a little above are disgusted at the Galen Westons of the world that have made over $1 billion in profits over and above their historical profits during the pandemic. More money during the pandemic. Yet they had pandemic pay in place for about 2-3 months and then canceled the pandemic pay, saying, well, it looks like we're heading in the right direction. Everybody in Canada understands, except for corporate Canada, that no, we're actually still in the pandemic and it's getting worse. So I think workers are starting to sit back and say, you know what, this is nonsense. I'm sick and tired of it. Think of all the PSWs on the front line, non-union, that worked in 2-3 long-term care facilities, transmitted the disease between the homes, led to so many deaths of our seniors that I will argue were completely avoidable. So workers are sitting there saying today, listen, I'm deemed essential, yet I'm paid terribly. So these conversations are going on, and workers are looking at unions today because they realize it's the only hope for fairness.
Thank you, Jerry.
You
So
have
we've come up to the hour. I want to say a big thank you, Miigwech, Jerry, to you, and we really appreciate your thoughts and your passion. It's palpable. Thank you very much.
You have a great day. Thank you.
Okay. So just for everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. Just to let you know, there's going to be an all panel this evening in French from 7 to 8 Eastern with the following panelists: Greg Fergus, Monique Pose, Alexandre Bodoris, Senatrice Julie Meville-Deschênes, and Marc-André Leclerc. So you can tune back into that. I've really enjoyed this morning, this afternoon. I'm in Vancouver, so this morning for me, Eastern time zone. Have a great rest of your day and be well. Stay safe.